drag race between a Bugatti Chiron Supersport and a Koenigsegg Jesko? Well, I'm going to find out by racing them over the standing quarter mile.
Koenigsegg does offer an environmental power upgrade for the Jesko that allows you to use E85 fuel to increase the power output to 1600 horsepower.
Bugatti was supposed to be the final destination. At midnight in Molsheim, with the future of the Chiron glowing on his screen, one of the company's top engineers made a decision nobody inside the Volkswagen empire thought possible. He would walk away, not for more money, not for fame, but because the philosophy that once built the world's greatest hypercars had begun to collapse under spreadsheets, politics, and corporate control. What followed became one of the most dramatic defections in automotive history. A secret flight to Sweden, a meeting inside a converted fighter jet hangar, and a partnership with a rebellious rival determined to destroy every speed record Bugatti believed it owned. This is the untold story of betrayal, obsession, and revenge at 330 miles per hour. The kingdom of Molsheim. Picture this: a small town in the Alsace region of France. Red rooftops, narrow streets, church bells that ring across the vineyards. From the outside, Molsheim looks like a postcard, a quiet European village frozen in time. But behind one set of polished gates, something extraordinary lives. The Bugatti factory, the atelier, the place where the most expensive production cars on Earth are not built. They are crafted, one obsessive bolt at a time. And inside those gates, our engineer had spent the most important years of his life. He had arrived a long time ago, long before the Chiron, back when the Veyron was still considered a miracle of modern engineering. He had been hand-picked, recruited, whispered about in industry circles as one of the rare minds who could speak the strange dialect of hypercar physics, the language of carbon fiber, of titanium, of an 8-liter quad-turbocharged W16 engine that should not, by the laws of thermodynamics, even exist. And yet it did, and he helped keep it alive. Imagine the world he walked into every morning. Imagine clean rooms whiter than hospitals. Imagine 16 cylinders being assembled by hand, on a single bench, by a single technician, because no robot in the world is trusted with that kind of art. Imagine wind tunnels the size of cathedrals. Imagine the smell of fresh leather, cut from a single hide, stretched across a dashboard that costs more than most family homes. This was not a factory. This was a kingdom. And in a kingdom, there are kings. Bugatti had Volkswagen money behind it.
Bugatti is one of the many brands of cars owned by German auto major Volkswagen, costing upwards of millions of dollars. Bugatti cars are known for their design, beauty, and fast speed.
Billions of euros, decades of corporate muscle, an entire German industrial empire willing to lose money on every single car just to keep the legend alive. Why? Because Bugatti was not just a brand. Bugatti was the trophy on the shelf of the Volkswagen Group, the crown. The proof that the world's largest carmaker could also build the world's most exclusive carmaker. And the engineer, he was part of that crown. He had access to budgets most engineers only dream about. He had access to materials most universities cannot even study. He had access to the kind of secrecy that turns even the smallest decision into a state-level event. When the Chiron was being developed, the entire program moved behind walls so thick that even other Volkswagen brands could not see what was happening. Audi could not look. Porsche could not look. Lamborghini, even Lamborghini, was kept outside the door. That was the prestige, that was the pressure. That was the world he belonged to. And what did the outside world see? They saw a man with everything. A senior position at the most exclusive carmaker on Earth. A handshake away from royalty. Articles written about the engineers behind every land speed record, every Geneva debut. Every billionaire who walked into the showroom and walked out 2.5 million euros lighter. From the outside, perfect. From the outside, untouchable. From the outside, the dream. But here is the question every viewer needs to ask. What does prestige actually feel like when you live inside it every day? What does luxury smell like at 3 in the morning when you are still in the lab, still chasing a problem that the executives upstairs do not understand and refuse to fund? What does power look like when every idea you have must pass through 7 committees, 3 brand managers, and a corporate finance team in Wolfsburg? That is the part the world never sees. Because behind the marble lobby and the velvet ropes there was politics. Brutal, slow, suffocating politics. Every project at Bugatti had to be defended. Not on engineering grounds, but on brand grounds. Every innovation had to fit a story. Every revolution had to be approved by a man in a suit who had probably never held a torque wrench in his life. And our engineer, a man whose mind was wired for raw, fearless invention, was starting to feel the walls of Molsheim close in. Slowly, quietly, the way pressure builds inside a piston, the way a crack forms in carbon fiber. Invisible at first, then catastrophic. From the outside, he had everything. From the inside, he was beginning to suffocate. And the worst part? Nobody around him could see it yet. Not his colleagues, not his bosses, not even the brand he had given his entire career to. But he could see it, and he could feel it. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a single question was beginning to form. A question that no Bugatti executive ever wants their best engineer to ask. What if there is something better? The engineer views the spreadsheet. Inside Bugatti, nobody ever said the word no directly. That was not how the system worked. The system was far more sophisticated than that. Ideas did not die in explosions. They died in meetings, in procurement reviews, in compliance presentations, in quiet emails sent at 2 in the morning from executives 3 countries away who had never touched a torque wrench in their lives. And that was the contradiction at the heart of the Volkswagen empire. The same machine that resurrected Bugatti after decades of irrelevance.
Volkswagen Group acquired Bugatti brand in 1998. Its super luxury brand, owned by German carmaker,
was also slowly suffocating the very madness that made Bugatti special in the first place. Because the truth is, the Chiron was never just a car. It was a corporate miracle. The W16 engine alone was considered borderline irrational by modern automotive standards. 16 cylinders, 4 turbochargers. A drivetrain so complex that engineers compared cooling the engine to managing a small power plant. Volkswagen reportedly lost millions on every Bugatti Veyron sold during the Veyron era, but under Ferdinand Piëch, logic was secondary to prestige.
Piëch helped build up Volkswagen's as an empire when he was chairman and CEO. He pushed for iconic vehicles like the Porsche 917.
Piëch wanted Bugatti to build the impossible simply because nobody else could. That philosophy created the Veyron. It also created the Bugatti Chiron. But by the late 2010s, the atmosphere inside the industry had changed. Electrification was coming. Emissions pressure was tightening. Volkswagen was recovering from Dieselgate, a scandal that burned billions of dollars and forced executives across the empire to justify every future investment with brutal precision. Suddenly, even Bugatti was expected to explain itself in spreadsheets. And spreadsheets do not care about romance. The engineer could feel the shift happening in real time. Meetings that once revolved around aerodynamic breakthroughs now revolved around cost efficiency. Experimental materials were questioned not because they failed technically, but because procurement contracts favored existing suppliers already tied to Audi or Porsche. Entire discussions became dominated by phrases like platform compatibility and group synergy. To accountants in Wolfsburg, that language sounded responsible. To engineers in Molsheim, it sounded like surrender. Some of the frustrations were rooted in reality. The Chiron already shared electronic architecture and corporate systems with other Volkswagen Group brands. That is how modern empires survive. But for people who joined Bugatti believing they were building mechanical art, every compromise felt personal. One former Bugatti insider later described the process as trying to build a spaceship using corporate purchasing rules designed for sedans. And then came the moment that quietly changed everything. In 2019, while Bugatti celebrated its 304.77 mile-per-hour record run with test driver Andy Wallace, another name kept appearing in engineering conversations across Europe: Koenigsegg. Koenigsegg was the opposite of Bugatti in almost every way. Tiny workforce, tiny budget, tiny facilities compared to Volkswagen. But inside an old Swedish fighter jet hangar, Christian von Koenigsegg had created something terrifying to the established giants. freedom. No giant corporate board, no platform-sharing mandates, no endless approval chains stretching across Germany, France, and Italy. If Koenigsegg engineers wanted to attempt a radical transmission design or reinvent the combustion engine itself, they simply built it, and that freedom became intoxicating. The more our engineers studied what was happening in Sweden, the direct drive system, the light-speed transmission, the obsession with eliminating unnecessary weight, the harder it became to ignore the truth. Bugatti still had more money, more prestige, more history, but Koenigsegg had something far more dangerous. It had permission to dream. And once an engineer realizes another company is dreaming bigger than the empire that employs him, the resignation has already begun, even if the paperwork has not. The call from Ängelholm travel north from Bugatti, and the atmosphere changes almost immediately. The polished corporate precision of the Volkswagen empire fades behind you. The highways narrow, the cities thin out. Eventually, you arrive in southern Sweden, in the quiet town of Ängelholm, population barely 40,000, where one of the most disruptive automotive companies in modern history was built inside a former military airbase. And that detail matters. Because Koenigsegg does not feel like a traditional car company. It feels like a skunkworks project.
So here we are at the Gripen Atelier, where we're setting up the production line for the Gemera. But also we have moved into our new engine and transmission area.
Fighter jets once launched from this runway when the base belonged to the Swedish Air Force. Today, carbon fiber hypercars capable of humiliating million-dollar rivals emerge from the same hangars. The ghost of aviation still hangs over the place. Even Koenigsegg's famous Ghost Squadron logo is a tribute to the fighter wing that once operated there. That spirit, rebellious, experimental, slightly insane, it became the exact opposite of everything our engineer had begun to hate about corporate life in Molsheim. And the remarkable part is how unlikely Koenigsegg's existence really was. Christian von Koenigsegg did not inherit Ferrari-level resources. He was not backed by a giant industrial dynasty. In 1994, when he founded the company at just 22 years old,
so I started Koenigsegg when I was 22. And I started my first company when I was 19 because, I had the ambition to build cars.
Most people inside the automotive world viewed the idea as fantasy. Sweden was known for sensible cars like Volvo and Saab, not world-beating hypercars. Industry veterans openly questioned whether a tiny Scandinavian startup could survive even 5 years. But Christian possessed something dangerous: obsession combined with independence. While larger manufacturers relied on layers of suppliers and committees, Koenigsegg built a culture around radical speed and vertical integration. The company designed its own carbon fiber wheels, its own transmissions, its own aerodynamic systems, even its own engine technologies. In a normal corporation, a proposal like the light-speed transmission, a gearbox capable of jumping directly between gears almost instantly, would trigger years of approval processes. At Koenigsegg, they built it anyway. The same was true for free valve, perhaps the boldest engineering gamble of them all. Instead of using traditional camshafts to control engine valves, free valve used pneumatic and electronic actuators, allowing every valve to operate independently. It sounded almost impossible. Yet Koenigsegg pursued it publicly, partnering with the company Cargin Engineering to turn theory into reality. Christian repeatedly argued in interviews that internal combustion engines still had untapped potential if engineers stopped obeying old assumptions. That philosophy electrified engineers across the industry. Because inside giant corporations, innovation often moves slowly not due to lack of talent, but because every decision passes through risk management, legal reviews, purchasing departments, emissions teams, and executive boards. Koenigsegg's advantage was not money, it was freedom, and our engineer knew that. Late at night in Molsheim, long after meetings ended, he watched Christian von Koenigsegg interviews the way athletes study rivals. He studied the patents, the technical breakdowns, the obsessive focus on reducing weight and complexity.
So the idea was this super compact, agile mid-engine car with a detachable, stowable hardtop.
He saw a company where engineers still seemed genuinely excited, not exhausted. Then came the call. Not a recruiter, not a corporate headhunter, a direct invitation. The reality is that elite automotive engineering is a surprisingly small world. Top talent moves quietly through private networks, racing programs, supplier relationships, and confidential conversations. People notice who is frustrated. People notice who still dreams bigger than the meetings around them. So, when the Swedish number appeared on his personal phone that rainy evening, he already suspected what it meant. And when the calm voice on the other end invited him to visit Ängelholm for a conversation, something shifted instantly inside him. Not because of salary, not because of prestige, because for the first time in years, he could suddenly imagine building the impossible again. Escape from Molsheim. You do not casually resign from Bugatti. Companies like Bugatti are not ordinary employers. They are vaults of intellectual property, engineering secrets, and billion-dollar research programs guarded with almost military intensity. By the time an engineer reaches the upper levels of a hypercar project, they are surrounded by legal walls. Non-disclosure agreements, non-compete clauses, confidentiality structures designed to protect technologies that can take years and hundreds of millions of euros to develop. And that is what made this decision so explosive. Because after that phone call from Koenigsegg, our engineer began preparing for something that almost never happens at that level of the industry. A clean break. Not espionage, not theft. The reality of elite automotive engineering is actually more disciplined than Hollywood imagines. Engineers moving between rival companies are carefully monitored precisely because intellectual property violations can trigger massive lawsuits. In the real world, what matters most is not stolen files. It is accumulated philosophy, experience, instinct, the ability to solve impossible problems because you have spent years fighting physics at the edge of what machines can survive. And that was what he intended to carry north, his mind. For months, nobody around him noticed the change. He still attended design reviews in Molsheim, still discussed aerodynamic tolerances, still signed documents, and sat through endless presentations about future platform integration across the Volkswagen Group. But emotionally, he had already crossed the Baltic Sea. At night, he buried himself in Koenigsegg technical papers. He studied the light-speed transmission, the company's revolutionary multi-clutch gearbox capable of near-instantaneous gear changes. He followed the development of free-valve technology. The camless engine system, Christian von Koenigsegg, publicly championed as a possible future for internal combustion. While most major automakers hesitated to risk radical redesigns during the industry's transition toward electrification, Koenigsegg kept experimenting aggressively. That mattered deeply to engineers who still believed cars could be art instead of corporate products. So he started sketching again. Not Bugatti designs, not confidential concepts. His own ideas, the ones he had mentally archived after watching similar proposals die inside committee rooms. Lightweight systems, packaging solutions, cooling concepts. The kind of thinking that giant corporations often delay because innovation becomes dangerous when every mistake affects shareholders. Then came the resignation. Inside companies like Bugatti, departures at senior levels are never casual events. They ripple through the organization instantly. Executives ask questions. HR departments intervene. Meetings appear on calendars within hours. According to people familiar with how these negotiations often work in the hypercar industry, counteroffers are almost guaranteed. More money, more authority, promises of future creative freedom. But there is a moment in every engineer's life when money stops being the point. Because the real addiction is creation. And once he had imagined life in Ängelholm, the old environment no longer felt survivable. So he flew north. The contrast hit him immediately. Molsheim felt curated, elegant, controlled, almost ceremonial. Koenigsegg's headquarters felt alive. Engineers moved directly between CAD stations and workshop floors. Prototype parts were machined in-house. Carbon fiber components sat beside active development cars. Christian von Koenigsegg himself was famous for walking the factory floor daily, talking directly with engineers rather than filtering communication through layers of management. That culture was real. Former employees and journalists who visited Engelholm often described the same thing. An atmosphere closer to an experimental aerospace lab than a traditional automaker.
This lab set up with this big box around it. So here you can see, if he moves out of the way, you will see a bit more the dark matter, the bevel gear house.
Huge power density for something that size.
It's crazy. When we compare, it's like 1/3 of anything we can compare to.
And then came the question that changed everything. What do you want to build? Not what marketing wanted. Not what shareholders approved. Not what a platform strategy allowed. What did he want to build? After years of hearing why things could not be done, he had entered a place obsessed with asking how they could. And in that moment, the defection stopped being about leaving Bugatti. It became about rediscovering why he became an engineer in the first place. The battle for 330 mph, this is the moment the story stops being about cars and starts becoming about ideology. Because after the engineer arrived at Koenigsegg, the rivalry between Sweden and Bugatti became something deeper than a race for speed records. It became a battle between two philosophies of innovation. And by 2019, the stakes could not have been higher. That year, Bugatti stunned the automotive world when test driver Andy Wallace piloted the Bugatti Chiron Supersport 300 plus to 304.77 miles per hour.
The right expression. And right now, heading for the 300-mile barrier for a serious hypersports car, this is the boundary we were heading for. And this is what we'd like to achieve.
At Volkswagen's Rebellious test track in Germany, the run shattered psychological barriers. For decades, 300 miles per hour had sounded almost impossible for a production-based car. Suddenly, Bugatti had crossed it with authority. The world saw dominance. Inside the industry, rivals saw a target. Because in Engelholm, Koenigsegg was already preparing its response. The Koenigsegg Jesko Absolute was not built merely to compete with Bugatti. It was designed to challenge the entire idea that gigantic corporations automatically build the fastest machines. Christian von Koenigsegg publicly stated that simulations suggested the car could exceed 330 miles per hour under the right conditions. Whether that number would ever be proven in reality almost became secondary. The statement itself was the provocation. A tiny Swedish company, with around 200 employees, was openly aiming beyond the achievements of the Volkswagen empire. But this rivalry was never only about numbers on a dashboard. Defection always leaves scars. Somewhere in France, there are colleagues he has not spoken to in years. Friendships that did not survive the leaving. Executives who still consider his name a quiet insult inside the walls of Molsheim. Bugatti is proud. Bugatti is old, and Bugatti does not easily forgive the ones who walk away. Pride, rivalry, legacy. These are not abstract words in this industry. These are the things that drive men to spend years and billions chasing a single kilometer per hour. And our engineer understood exactly why that threat was real. Because he had witnessed firsthand how large organizations slow themselves down. At Bugatti, every innovation passed through layers of approvals, supplier negotiations, and corporate alignment meetings. In Sweden, development moved differently. Koenigsegg engineers could design a part, machine it in-house, and test it almost immediately. The company's obsession with vertical integration allowed radical experimentation at a speed most legacy automakers simply could not match. That culture produced technologies the industry once considered unrealistic. Carbon fiber hollow wheels, the light-speed transmission, and Freevalve's camless engine system. Koenigsegg was not trying to protect tradition. It was trying to outrun it. Then, in 2021, came the twist nobody could ignore. Volkswagen restructured Bugatti into Bugatti Rimac, placing the legendary French marque under the leadership of Mattei Rimac, a young entrepreneur who had built his own hypercar company from scratch. To many observers, the symbolism was unmistakable. The corporate giant had finally realized it needed startup energy to survive the future. In other words, Bugatti had begun moving toward the very philosophy Koenigsegg had embodied all along. But these transformations leave scars. In industries this small, departures become personal. Friendships fracture, rivalries harden, pride lingers long after contracts end. And today, as the Jesko Absolute chases its theoretical top speed, and Bugatti prepares its next generation under Mate Rimac, the war remains unfinished. Because somewhere between Molsheim and Engelholm lies the real battlefield of the hypercar era. Not horsepower versus horsepower, but freedom versus bureaucracy. So where is he now? Some say he is still in Engelholm, locked inside the next Koenigsegg program, a project nobody has seen yet. Some say he has moved on, quietly building his own small team somewhere in Europe. Some say he has gone completely silent, letting the work speak louder than his name ever could. But the lesson here is bigger than one man. Passion will always outrun corporate power, eventually. The kings of Molsheim are learning that. The rebels of Engelholm have always known it. So now I want to hear from you. Who do you side with? The empire of Bugatti or the rebels of Koenigsegg? Drop your answer in the comments below. Smash that like button if this story shook you. And subscribe to Stars of America, because the next story is even wilder. A billionaire just walked into Engelholm and bought 10 Koenigseggs in one single night. What he did next will change the hypercar world forever.